Thanks for joining us for our first in a series of short podcasts designed specifically for founders and geared toward offering insights from thought leaders about all kinds of subjects of interest to those dedicated to building a successful life sciences company. Today, our guest is Subh Roy, a San Francisco-based advisor, financial consultant, and board member to emerging biotech companies. Subh began his career spending over 2 decades advising healthcare companies in numerous financial and M&A transactions. He currently serves as a board member at Vicentis, a Zurich company working in renal cell carcinoma, and has previously worked with companies such as Orion Biotech, Canarsis Therapeutics, and Vidaris. He has an MBA from the Fuqua School at Duke, as well as a graduate of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And what I guess I'd like to focus on here is, of course, financing and the change that we've experienced over the last couple of years. I saw something, maybe it was in Fierce or Endpoints today. I'll just start with quoting. Carta, a company that manages startup capitalization table data, which gives direct insight into how rounds come together, found that seed valuations, including healthcare startup seed valuations, are still up 43% as of the second quarter of 2023, compared with the second quarter of 2021. Meanwhile, median valuation for Series B, C, and D rounds are all lower than they were 2 years ago. I understand that that is true just because I know founders. What I don't understand, Sue, is why that's true. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, Tim. First of all, thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure and honor to join this podcast and share my thoughts and ideas. What we are really seeing in this environment is a clear divergence between the haves and the have-nots. The haves have got innovative data, and they're able to control their destiny. If you look at the amount of funding that has gone into biotech just this year alone, companies have received $20 billion of funding in spite of the fact that the markets have been pretty choppy and volatile. So this funding is going somewhere. However, I think there is a clear have-nots, who are either suffering from disappointing data, bloated balance sheet, too much OpEx. And I think these companies have some cash, but nothing more than that, what we call zombie companies. So if you keep that in the backdrop and aspire to what a founder today need to go towards is really to build a business which is sustainable. And when I mean by sustainable, it is to attract investors who are more discerning in the last couple of years in terms of where they're allocating their capital. They want the capital to be allocated, or they want the management team in these companies to allocate their capital. That provides the maximum value inflection in terms from a milestone perspective in a capital efficient way to generate validated clinical outcomes. Now, not too many companies who are basically in that have-not stage have managed to do that. So today, a lot of those companies are facing layoffs. So they are basically aligning the objective, the current cash, with the strength of the team that you need to have. So one of the aspects that a founder need to look for is how big my team need to be. Is that something that I can do an outsource way, or do I need to have every capability in-house? Investors are actually prioritizing companies that have demonstrated ability to raise grant funding, ability to do early stage collaborations, and not only with pharma, also with digital tech companies or CROs and others, in a way to improve their productivity and really refining the R&D processes as you go and build out from a preclinical stage to a clinical stage. And I think this is where the companies who are able to do so are being rewarded. So the early stage funding that you just mentioned to me, it doesn't surprise me because a lot of these companies have the hindsight of learning from others and not making the same mistakes of the last 2 years, or probably the over excessive capital infusion into these companies, which just simply did not have enough legs to stand on. So that you divert and deploy that capital towards companies which is going to emerge from this exercise stronger, more lean, and obviously will be then rewarded for good clinical data and a partnership and or both. So I think that's basically the way I am looking at the environment and seeing how companies are trying to put themselves into the haves and the have-nots, ability and the territory.
So let's say that you're starting with a blank easel and you're a new company. And of course, one of the things that those investors are going to look to is, what does your team look like? Particularly if you have not already exited a previous company. So how do you think about building that team in an era of less?
Right. So investors really tend to focus on companies that are led by type of people who either have one or the other characteristics. Either they're ambitious scientists, they are at the front line of their cutting edge research, they have fantastic ideas, it's a platform, or some ideas that basically come from the insights of the research they do in the academic setting, and then have published this in high profile journals. And therefore they need support from the financial side to get those real. The other category of management team that I'm noticing, or which is pretty popular, is the veteran drug developers. These are operators in the industry who have been in the industry for decades. They have decided to start their own company after working in big pharma, and they have the network to basically build teams around their own capabilities. And they also have a very strong leverage with the investor bases and pharma, relationships and so on and so forth. And so they call upon these friends to create a very strong team around the development. If you are neither, I think the benefit of doubt always comes down to basically, do you have a stellar board? Do you have a technology which is right the top of the pops, like the GLP-1 scenario, metabolic diseases, or you have something exceptional that differentiates yourself? I think the Me Too story today is becoming very difficult to push ahead. And therefore, for every founder, the 3 questions that you really have to ask yourself: is the company fundamentally a valuable business looking at competition? Is the management team able to deploy capital to create the most value-creating milestones? And if the capital needs of the company financiable, because if you have a need for capital which goes beyond what you're able to raise, that idea will never going to get financed. So at a fundamental level, before you start these companies, you need to have a clear idea about how to structure these businesses. And no matter what the fundamental is, you need to have a business acumen to build a biotech company. Science is great. That is the hallmark of biotech. But you need people who can actually think in a business sense. And that is being rewarded more and more about companies. Again, the haves and the have-nots I talked about. It's really have those people who have done it, been there, know the risk, and able to then sell that idea to sophisticated investors and get their attention.
One of the things that I think about in difficult times is sort of peripheral assets. How can you use those to, excuse me, to benefit really what is the mission of the company? And particularly those are prominent where the company thinks of itself, or in fact is, a platform. There are tertiary assets and clinicals that go along perhaps with that. So with many companies pursuing so many similar targets, what's the process by which a company might pursue cooperation with other companies to mitigate redundancies or overcome the high cost of capital? What's the process for thinking about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think from the way things are translating, the conservative financial climate, it's actually making founders rethink about the whole portfolio. And not only the founders, it's also the way you present this to the investors who ultimately then have to finance that portfolio. It's about, putting your focus on the asset that has the best chance of making it. Now, of course, as a preclinical company, it's always sometimes difficult to actually, pivot yourself to an asset. But then what is basically happening, if you see the trend, is that certain indications are being prioritized over others. So that's the starting point. Also, ability to look at asset that can be partnered, and not only with partner with early stage collaboration, raising some grant funding to, develop them, which are non-dilutive source of financing and so on and so forth, should really be considered for assets which are, again, may be important enough from a mechanistic point of view. You may share the same MOA, you may share the same technology platform, or you may consider basically delaying them. If you're facing a financially distressed situation, you may consider either delaying them, or you basically may consider doing a deal with other companies so that the asset is being developed outside of your company. And we are seeing a situation where the pharma industry is been very deal hungry. If you look at the licensing deal that has taken place in the last couple of years and even before, the pharma activity is driven by multiple things. One is the market exclusivity loss of some of their pipeline assets. Second is basically they're facing a lot of headwinds about IRA, a lot of headwinds about FTC, a lot of headwinds. And these are basically making pharma a very interesting player or a partner, and creating the biotech that room and space to basically explore those partnership opportunities. And last but not least, I think you also have to look at collaborating with other players. I talked about CROs, digital health companies, so that you identify ways to differentiate your secondary asset, so that that looks in front of the eyes of an investor, not very dissimilar from the lead asset that you really want to focus on. So freeing up capital to focus on your time, money, and resources is a very strong indication about the founder's ability to find that asset to go after. And I must say that, look, I think the horses for courses situation, if the environment changes in 12 months' time, everything may actually look financeable again. But I think instead of focusing on when this situation is going to change, I think companies really need to, focus on the current environment and how to run my business in this current environment. I think, and answering to regarding the platform versus product question, I think what we have seen in general this year, the platform companies have taken a lot of hit in terms of funding. I think investors have been more discerning in supporting product ideas, because unless you can translate the product from platform into the clinic as a product, you just do not get the same benefit of the valuation. Platform itself may have a value, but then the actual reward is really when you convert that value into a product. So therefore, I think what one can do is basically look for safer bets. So if when I talk about the indications, I think next gen gene editing, right now the obesity, the entire metabolic space, the I&I space, immunology, inflammation space, some of the within the cancer, not everything, but certainly radiopharmaceuticals, ADCs, are doing very well. I mean, their companies are still able to raise quite a bit of funding. But if you look at the oncology space this year, most oncology deals, financing deals, have been Series B and beyond. And 12 of the 20 largest oncology companies that they invested in are in the clinic. That means they already translated that platform into the product area. So it may come around, it may revert back to the platform, but right now the conversion or the translation of the platform into the product is really where you're going to get rewarded. So thinking about that upfront and with a view of what kind of a partnership that's coming down the line is very important for a founder to consider. How far you want to extend the platform. Platform itself is valuable, but then it has only got a certain legs to run beyond the point you need to convert it into product.
Right. And you mentioned it. Platform companies now have to think in terms of the IRA and the changes in terms of patent law. How long are you going to, have unencumbered ability to sell your product?
Correct.
As things come further and further down the line with that platform, not so long anymore, and that's gotta, I would think, impact the valuation for a platform company.
That's correct. I think it's obviously a pharma territory. These impacts are more visible in the pharmaceutical market compared to biotech. But yes, as a founder, you need to think through your patent life, and when you hand over the asset to someone to commercialize, the patent life for that investee company to actually make the return on investment. So absolutely, you have to think through. It's almost like I say in the concept of tunnel vision. You really have to see through the whole tunnel when you enter into it. And, it's no longer possible to say, look, I'm only going to go from A to B and then somebody else's problem down there. You have to really see all the way through to see if there's a light at the end of that tunnel or not. And I think a lot of investors are actually demanding the founders to think through the tunnel vision to say, if you're planning to do this thing, how far can you run with this thing, and why would it be attractive for then passing the risk on to somebody who's going to then have to take this on and commercialize this and also make money out of this. So I think that is where a lot of forward thinking is necessary, which I think as a biotech CEO, sitting in a preclinical stage and thinking 15 years ahead of you can be pretty challenging. I think that's where the disconnect lies between what the market is asking the companies to do and what the companies actually can do. There's always going to be some boxes that you cannot tick, and of course, if you could have ticked all boxes, you probably don't need those investors. But I think as many of the boxes you can tick is really where the investors are giving you benefit for that. So, and I think here the experience of the management team do play a role. Those who have done this, those who have seen and navigated the companies through choppy waters. Of course, we are facing this situation not for the first time. We have seen in the financial crisis. We have seen in the .com era. Every time the market has recorrected themselves. So people who have seen through those cycles, probably are better positioned to navigate today compared to first-time founders who have never seen and never had to enter the choppy waters.
How does that first-time founder talk with an investor and convince that investor that in fact they have enough within them, to make up for their lack of experience? How do you?
Yeah, it's a great challenge, and if you look at what investors are betting on, they're betting on safer bets and experienced teams, right? And by definition, as I said, if it's a very innovative research by an ambitious scientist, who has published very widely and has a peer, in the industry, and many KOLs follow him. I think it's easier. I'm not saying it's easy. It's easier to make that thing. But I think the founders have to understand a few common things, that a brand new modality with commercialization risk is difficult, right? If it's a known target, early stage it's okay. At least you're not facing risk on both sides of the equation, right? Not every innovation is going to become a startup company. Not every innovation is going to become a product. So I think, again, fundamentally, the question when you're starting off, you have to really question those things that I mentioned earlier. Is it a valuable business, or will be a valuable business can compare with the competition? Competition is not only the existing one, also what's coming down the line. Am I able to dedicate the time and resources to generating value inflection milestones? And is the financing need financiable? Because you may have the greatest idea, but the need is so high. So therefore, I think management teams are being rewarded, those who are basically surrounding themselves with experts, who can advise them. So creating that expertise is very necessary. So you may have a very strong scientific expertise. You need to bring along people who can assist you on the business side, business development, financing, KOL testimonials, bringing a board who can pick up the phone and talk to an investor saying, look, I'm in the board of this company. I've done my diligence. I put my credibility on the line. Those are all the soft factors that really helps to, arm that scientist, to sell that story. However, complicated science to an investor is always difficult to sell. So, you need to give them enough information to make the conversation meaningful. But at the same time, you have to really, like a layman's term, try to talk to them about something that makes it attractive. If you open a PhD thesis in the first meeting, you're not going to get very far. So really understanding how to pitch to the right investor is something that you learn as you surround yourself with people who have done this before you. The other aspect clearly is that understanding the availability of capital and maximizing its potential is a very key critical success factor today. I mean, there are many, many founders that I sometimes come across who basically say our technology ought to be appreciated and admired. On the other hand, when you showcase this to the external investors or pharma, et cetera, you get all kinds of feedback, which you need to somehow marry as you're basically having your internal deliberations on those processes, actually. So I would just say that, doing some homework on the right investor to pitch this to. If the investors have never invested in the space that you are in, the likelihood of them biting into it is quite difficult. So doing some background research on the investor groups, when you find the one that you would be able to, because they share some common interest, then you basically have to position the story in a way that hits the nail where the interests lie, actually. So, Tim, I mean, the downturns, the resilience of the founders are tested. And great companies, in my view, are formed when the early resilience then becomes a culture of the company. And I think this is a perfect time to basically test those skill sets. And I think the a founder should not, shy away from not trying to do those things just because the markets are a bit, unkind right now. But, it's just that you may have to knock on more doors than normally you would do, especially what has been the case, a couple of years back.
Yeah. I always think about the famous quote from Jack Welch, who's the business icon behind GE years ago. He said that the most important thing about business is to see things as they are,
right?
Not as you would like them to be. But if you did that all the time, you wouldn't be a founder. You wouldn't take that leap because, of course, it's not realistic. So how do you help founders overcome those prejudices and help them understand and come to grips with new realities?
Yeah, I mean, there is no, standard checklist of things. It's really coming down to, the background of the founder, the background of the science or technology they're promoting, and who the right people, they're surrounding themselves with. I think, I must say that, most cases, founders do not have all the answers to the question investors ask in terms of data, in terms of technology, and of course, you need the funding to actually find the solution to the challenges that you are trying to address. And But I think there are some basic rules that you have to look at. A is that you have to do a landscaping of the indication, what else is going developed or in the clinic or being coming through the research pipeline and in the market. So the landscaping of the competition is very necessary. And then that allows you to differentiate. Why are you different? And not only different today, why you would be different, if this product or this research product becomes a medicine, right? So most founders do not have, the TPP of the asset that they're developing on at the preclinical stage. So, it may go through many iterations, but I think, understanding your differentiation is key. And the third element, is really the team. You may have certain skill set. You have to find people who complement you, with other skill sets and reaching out to them. Because look, I mean, this is a sector which has innovation written all over it. People will basically, invest in this sector just for the one and only purpose to benefit the patients. So therefore, I think the motivation is very clear why you're doing what you're doing, but the steps to get there need to be thought through, especially in a financing environment. So putting a right team together, finding collaboration partners, attracting KOLs and board members who are then able to lend their credibility to the story, can open doors with investors. And also, frankly speaking, I mean, I could not emphasize more, talk to pharma. And, pharma is always interested in looking at anything that comes their way. I mean, even if they have no intention of doing anything with you, they're interested or they're curious about what you're doing. And by doing that, you're raising your profile with the pharma. If you meet the same company, 5 times, when you actually then come down to a point where you want to do a transaction with them, if you have already seen your progress, the conversion of that phone call into a deal making is very high. If the pharma has never heard your name, never heard the technology, because they have 5,000 BD guys running around the world, and then nobody has picked your company up, it is super difficult. I mean, there's a notion that call the advisor, they can get the deal done. Advisors don't do the deal. The deal is done between the two principals. And you need to really get the principals as early excited, even when you have nothing to say, just to say, look, I exist. This is what we are doing. I'll come and keep you posted. And look, I have never seen in my 20 years experience a pharma never saying, look, I'm not interested in meeting you because, I don't want to know what you're doing. So, it has been something that I could advocate to any founder trying to build a business, to get that outside feedback, which you can then build into your internal, strategy, and not only build the internal strategy based on your core group team, but also showcase the story, because you get all kinds of feedback, which can be very valuable at a very early stage of your company development.
Well, Subh, I want to thank you very much for that commercial for what will be our next short, in fact, with a Merck executive about how you talk to a pharma as opposed to a VC.
Right.
I'm not sure every founder understands those differences. But anyway, I'd like to thank you so much for your time today, and sharing your insights. And of course, I know that you can be reached on LinkedIn. So I would encourage anyone who might like to have a further conversation with you to reach out in that way.
Look forward to it.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. And have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to the Life Sciences and Biotech podcast. We'll see you in the next episode. The information contained in this website and podcast are purely informational and not considered investment recommendations. Tim Doherty's participation in Biotech Insights is separate and apart from his role as an investment advisor representative. Nothing contained herein can be construed as a recommendation or endorsement of any of the companies discussed. Tim Doherty also has no financial affiliation with any of the companies mentioned in this communication. Tim Doherty makes no representation that the information contained in this material is accurate and is under no obligation to update this information as changes occur.